Okay, so we're now coming back to talk a little bit more about organizations and information systems. So if you remember back to chapter 3, we talked a lot about business processes and how information systems can help with that. And you know, what we want to do this time is dig a little bit more into the synergy between how organizations and information systems work. Okay. In particular, what can happen when organizations have hundreds, if not thousands, of different information systems all within their organization, and how do you deal with that? And it's kind of natural for this to develop over time. So there's an idea that came up that this is maybe a big problem. All right. So that's kind of what we want to talk about here. Now, if you remember from the very beginning case in this section, it starts with this surgeon, Dr. Romero Flores or something like that, and he is trying to develop a prototype of a health care and patient portion of this PRIDE system. So what is this PRIDE system? Well, I mean, you think about it, there's a lot of different places that a lot of things people do to try to stay healthy. Right? So they may go work out, they go to doctors, they talk to their insurance companies. So there's a lot of different interacting things that an individual will do to stay healthy. However, there's usually very little connection between all these different things. So you have your healthcare professionals, you have your health clubs, you have your medical insurance companies, but they all are using separate information systems. Well, the PRIDE system was kind of designed around this idea is that, well, why can't we consolidate some of this somehow? Right? Specifically around health concerns of particular patients. And then we can have a bigger picture about someone's health. What are they doing to improve or not on their recovery from health issues, or just to maintain good health? So in this prototype, though, that they're talking about in this case, they want to know if patients will achieve the expected benefits from a workout after a surgery. And that was kind of the idea behind the PRIDE system. And they're going to come back to this PRIDE system case later in other chapters. So please do read this and keep following through, because it does, I think, ground our discussion pretty well. Because this is an issue, right? So we have this information in multiple different places, but how do you see the big picture? So today what we're going to look at is how do information systems vary by scope. And by scope, what we're looking at is, who has access to the information. Okay. Number 2, we want to determine how do enterprise information systems solve problems of departmental silos, and we'll define what a departmental silo is and what an enterprise information system is, and yada yada yada. And in particular, we'll look at 3 different kinds: customer relationship management, enterprise resource planning, and then an enterprise application integration. So those 3 different types of systems. And then number 4, how do enterprise information systems solve problems of enterprise silos? Right? So that's kind of where we're going to cover today. So looking at it, and then and later some of the chapter extensions, we're actually going to dig into some of these. In particular, what are functional systems, what are ERP systems, what are customer supply chain management systems, and so on. So how do information systems vary by scope? Well, a lot of you are very, very familiar with the personal level. And these are things that you're working with, whether it's on your computer or on your phone. But the data exists specifically for you. If there's a problem, it's very isolated. It's easy to manage any changes. So if you decide to download a new app for your phone, very easy for you to do, right? So that, and at the personal level, it is very simple to set up and to use. The problem is, oftentimes there's information that might be useful across multiple people, and if there isn't some sort of way of integrating that data, it's difficult to share that information. So what first really kind of came up was something called a work group. And you can kind of think of a work group as, and here they talk about it being between 10 and 100 users. It can actually be smaller than that. You could have a work group of 2, 3, or 5 people, like even in your little group assignments, right? You have groups of 4 mostly, and you have your own set of software that you use, your own information system. So these are procedures understood within the group, problem solutions within the group. So if you do have a problem, you have to work it out within your group. A little bit more difficult to deal with change. And I've seen this throughout this semester even. Some of you struggling to deal with some changes. In one case, a student dropped the course in the middle of the semester, and how does the rest of the group deal with that? Particularly not just with how do you do the assignments, but also how does that impact the technology that you're using? But it also could be something as big as something departmental. So, for example, at the College of Business, we use a SharePoint application that allows us to share documents across the entire College of Business. And we have, around 100 users on that. Right? Then you can go all the way up to the enterprise level. And this can be easily over 100 to thousands of users. But procedures are generally very formalized in how you do things. Problem solutions, if you do have problem solutions affect the entire enterprise, can be very difficult to change. But for example, the entire so at East Carolina University, we have we use a same base web coding for the entire university, right? And so there's this fundamental architecture or technology that they're using, and I won't dig into the details of that for you. Just know that they do use the same thing across the entire university. Now, there's a lot of ways each college can customize that, but we wanted the same base so that way there's a similar look and feel, a similar way of displaying things throughout the university. So that was important. And we want to have some similarities as you move across. But they do leave some things up to the department. But it is an enterprise. Another example of an enterprise system at East Carolina University is Banner or even Blackboard, right? So these are enterprise solutions. But what's nice about them, and we'll talk more about this, is that they also facilitate work group discussion. So Blackboard, you can think of our class as basically a work group, right? Blackboard facilitates work groups, but does it at the enterprise level. And then lastly, the scope is inter-enterprise. And so like the first case talking about the PRIDE system, well, that's between enterprises, right? So in order to do something like this, though, you need to have very, very formalized procedures. Problems can affect multiple organizations, and it can be very difficult to change. So these are the kind of the basic levels, and like I said, some of these, you can talk about a work group information system and an enterprise system that impacts work group and personal information systems. But what's important here is where is it ultimately managed, and that's where you talk about the scope, right? So it's not, even though it may facilitate a certain lower level group, it's the ultimate answer is who does the ultimate, like who's in charge of updates. Who's in charge of bugs and issues, right? So how do enterprise information systems solve the problems of departmental silos? Well, let's first talk about what is an information silo. So if you're not familiar with what a silo looks like, I just threw this picture up here. Basically, this is a place for storing grain. Well, what's nice about silos, though, is you can put different types of grain in different silos. So obviously you don't want to mix wheat with corn, with barley, with beans, but you could put in each silo a different type of grain and not have to worry about the mixing, right? Well, an information silo is kind of similar in that you have certain information, but it doesn't mix with information from other places. And so what happens is that departments will create information systems, and the information, the data, will be stored in these silos separately, not mixing with anything else. Okay, so how does this happen? Well, departments, a lot of times a department will identify a need within their department, and they'll say, well, we really need this to do our job better. And so they go out and create or purchase an information system that's designed specifically to meet only their information processing needs. Because remember, we talk about business processes, we want to make them more effective. Well, so information systems can help that specific business process. And so it's very, very common that businesses start working at the departmental level, buying or creating information systems that solve that specific need. So this data, though, are isolated in separate information systems. So what's the problem? Well, several problems. Number one, you could end up with data duplication or data inconsistency. So for example, here you might have like a sales and marketing versus an accounting database. Well, you might have the same company and you have the same ship to address but a different bill to address. Now it may just be that they've changed where you send the billing. It might be that billing different things you have to send to different places, and so we don't know exactly where the problem is, and that is the problem, right? So data inconsistency, and we've duplicated the data. We have now data in two different places, so we've doubled the amount of amount of storage that we need, at the very least. And that's just if you only duplicate it once. If you do it multiple times, you may end up with 3, 4, 5 times as much storage space that you need. You also end up with some disjointed processes. So for example, suppose a vendor needs to get approval for credit. Well, different processes may end up with giving different amounts of approval. So sales and marketing might want to get a credit approval of, say, $37,000. Accounting runs through analysis and finds out, well, no, we can only approve $32,000 of that for whatever reasons. What does that mean for sales and marketing? So then the process goes back to them, and they're like, well, wait a minute here, this isn't going to work. We need approval for $37,000, not $32,000. So there's a problem, right? You might also have limited information and lack of integrated information. So, the salespeople might want to know more about a specific customer to see should they be treated as a preferred customer or not. Well, they might make a lot of good orders, but we don't know if they're paying off those orders, right? So should we continue providing goods to this customer if they're not paying for them in a timely or consistent manner? That can be a big problem. You might also end up with isolated decisions which lead to organizational inefficiencies. So for example, there are different data from different databases. The order data might say redouble sales effort to IndyMac, whereas the accounting says One West has been slow to pay. Well, where should you focus your efforts? Okay, and in all, it basically leads to increased expense. So these are some of the problems, right? Now it's natural for them to develop independently, but after they do, your business can run into some serious issues. So how do you solve this? Well, the answer is something called integration, right? So if you think about like a work group, so the example they give in the book is about a physician partnership. So if you think about it, maybe this is a office that has 10 physicians in it, right? And the physicians all see patients, but they also need to. Some of them work at the hospital, so there's data at the hospital with them working there, but they also still want to have access to that same hospital data. Well, how do you do that? So you have the information system for that particular work group, but maybe in the hospital they can't get access. And maybe this isn't the best example because a lot of physician partnerships aren't necessarily in the hospital. Some of them are. But the question is, so you have physicians and hospitals store separate data about patients, but you basically are duplicating this. And I think in his example here, they're trying to say the physician partnership is within the hospital itself. So this office, yes, they do have their separate office building, but they also all work at the hospital, perhaps to deal with serious medical needs, not just regular visits. So while the physicians and the hospitals each have their own, and these are called functional applications, and we'll talk more about that in, I believe it's chapter extension 8. Functional applications, they need something that can start integrating this data between the physicians and the hospitals, which is an enterprise application. So what that allows, and right now they're working on things called medical health records, and there's different names for that. Health medical records. Let me rephrase that. HMRs. But at any rate, so they're trying to find a way to integrate these different systems together to make a better, so that there's less duplicate, so that they can avoid some of those issues we saw with the silos of information. We also have a problem at the enterprise level when you're trying to think about how do we integrate our hospital with other hospitals and pharmacies and other pieces of information, maybe even the insurance companies. So you got all these different entities that need to have some similar access to information. How do you do that? Well, the hospital and maybe say a local drugstore want to have the same data on the patient prescriptions. But right now their information systems are separate. So they have to have two different sets of information for one patient. Now that may not seem like a big deal to begin with, but what happens if somehow they get out of sync? So there is an order, the hospital has said, hey, yes, you need to have this medication, but maybe there's an order entry problem at the pharmacy side, so they get the wrong order. So now a patient may be given the wrong drugs, right? So that obviously that's a huge problem, right? And this can happen in a lot of different instances where things get messed up. So now there's a big push too to even go beyond enterprise level application systems and look at enterprise. So inter just meaning between. So these are distributed systems using oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes using web technologies in the cloud that allow the information to be shared across multiple different places. So another example that I thought of when we were, so I was going through this was, how do we deal with exams and proctoring? So if you think of the work group as our class, I give you a syllabus, an exam schedule, so you have that stuff, and we have a class website. But at the enterprise level, we use Blackboard, so that way you can keep track of all of your classes, all of your exams, and whenever they're going to be scheduled, right? However, the university's system is not integrated with our proctoring system. So actually there is no enabling technology right now. In fact, if I want to make a proctored exam available to my online students, I actually have to go to a different information system that's provided by the University of North Carolina General Administration. They have their, and you guys have all gone to this, so assuming you finished your midterm. But you all have to go to the northcarolina.edu website in order to schedule a proctor, right? So this is a separate system, but I also have to add my exams to that same system. It is not automatically done for me. So now I have two places I have information about the exams, and I have to make sure they're in sync myself manually. Well, and this has actually happened to me before, where I've occasionally I've put an exam scheduled to start on a certain date, but I forget to make it available on Blackboard. And so now the students are going to the proctoring center to start their exam, but it's not available on Blackboard, so they can't take their exam. So that's the type of error that can occur when these are out of sync, right? Now it's usually pretty easy to fix. Someone calls me, I open it, make it available, bam, done, right? But that's why these information systems, you want to try, if you can, to integrate them. Now, why haven't they done this at the inter-enterprise level? Well, mostly because every single university does a different thing, and even in the same university, professors do different or have different techniques for enabling online exams. So because of that great disparity, they just said, well, this is going to be too complex, too difficult to integrate all this. We're not going to do it. And so that can sometimes be an answer too. They're not. All right, but here's back to another medical example. All right, so suppose that a patient is ready to leave. Right? How do you ensure that everything is taken care of? Because you actually have to, you have to take care of a lot of different things and a lot of different information going across the organization, and sometimes even to outside the organization, to ensure that everything is set for when the patient leaves a hospital. So it starts with a doctor who issues the discharge order. Right? It says the patient's done healthy enough to go home. Well, that gets sent to the nurse, and the nurse does a lot of the groundwork. So the doctor signs off, the nurse does the work, such as preparing take-home meds, but they also have to notify the kitchen to stop bringing food for this patient because the patient isn't there. They also need to call the family and make sure that someone's there to pick them up if it's necessary. And then the family has to actually get there, and when they arrive and the medications that were ordered have been delivered, then the patient can actually be discharged completely. And so there's probably even a separate process there, the discharge process. And then once the patient has been discarded, you have to prepare a room for them. For the next patient, right? So it might mean cleaning the sheets and dusting or sweeping the floor, whatever they're going to do, right? When the patient heads on home. So there's a lot of pieces of information that needs to be sent around the entire organization in order for this to be done effectively. And that's where things like enterprise applications come in so handy. Now in this case, the pharmacy they're talking about is actually in-house, I think. But the point being, though, an enterprise system would hopefully integrate this all together into one application. So the nurse doesn't have to go to 3 different applications to do something. Right? It can all be done in one place. And that's kind of the key to this. All right. Now, can you imagine actually trying to put something like this into an organization? Right? It's not easy. And there's many reasons why. In part because you're dealing with a lot of different business processes and you're trying to make software do it all. Well, the problem is the software, remember how I said that the software is similar in some respects to the procedures, and that they both are the rules that are being done? Well, what happens if the procedures and the software don't coincide? That means the rules don't coincide, and that creates a problem. You can either change the software or you can change the procedures. Well, that's where something called business process reengineering comes in, is if you go about not changing the software but changing the procedures. So business process reengineering is the altering and designing business processes to take advantage of new information systems. Got that? So you're actually changing the business process, those procedures, and how business gets done. So if you think back to the previous slide, it might be that this is not the most efficient way. So it might have been that prior to this, the nurse would not send an order directly to the kitchen. It might be that the nurse would send and would contact the department, and the department would have a runner who goes down to the kitchen. So there might have been a different system, or maybe that the kitchen itself would send somebody around right before they started making food to see who's going to be there. Well, now the kitchen doesn't have to send somebody around. Now the kitchen gets orders sent to it. Right? So, I mean, there's a lot of different variations on how this can work and how you get the food to the patients in the hospital. we don't know exactly what was happened, but now we're saying, well, we don't necessarily need somebody to walk around and do this stuff. We're going to do it automatically. So you can cut out people that might have been doing a job that isn't needed anymore, right? So you have to re-engineer how your business works. Now, the problem with this is that it's very, very, very difficult, slow, and exceedingly expensive to do. Now, there's somebody out there who can help with this. They're called systems analysts. And actually, if you want to know what MIS, what type of career you can get out of this, systems analysts, we probably, most of our graduates, I'd say 50% of our graduates go some sort of systems analyst position. Sometimes they're called business analysts. It's a similar concept. The idea is you have to try to understand the business processes and the information systems that are being used for them. And analysts will analyze this and try to come up with ways of working information systems into an organization effectively, right? So systems analysts interview key personnel throughout the organization, try to get an idea of what can be done. But not only what can be done, but you need somebody at the high levels in the organization who has the time and the energy and the skills to help this work. Now, when we get to talking about enterprise resource planning, this is actually a very big component of that. Because either you end up having to change one of two things, the software or the business processes. In some cases, it's better not to change the software, it's better to change the business processes sometimes, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. I believe it's chapter extension 9. All right. Moving on then. So how do these different enterprise systems work? So basically, number one, you have to get organizations to rethink how they do work. So you can't just accept that there's all these silos of information and silos of functionality, and start thinking about the organization as a whole. That there's inherent processes that save money and time in business process reengineering. These are usually called industry best practices. Now, and basically these industry best practices have been found time and time again to be the best, most efficient way to do certain types of processes. And if we can put those best practices into software, so we're taking the procedures, these rules, and putting them into the software and automate the software, now what we can do is have your particular organization doing more best practices. So hopefully avoiding slow and inefficient practices and moving towards more best practices, because the software is basically making you. Which can help eliminate costs of developing complex applications in-house. All right, so the first one we'll talk about is customer relationship management. And so if you think about those three terms put together, you got your customer, and you want to have a relationship with them, but you also want to manage that relationship based upon who the type of customer they are, where they are in your life cycle of the customers, and so on. So it manages all interactions with a customer through 4 phases of the customer life cycle: the marketing, the customer acquisition, the relationship management, and loss and churn. So it's a very customer-centric application and is designed to help organizations that are very customer-centric. And you can probably think of a few of those, particularly things like retail, right? They tend to be very customer-centric. Now that's not true of all industries, but so suppose you're in waterworks, right? So you're putting pipes in the ground to run water to people's houses. Well, yes, you do work with customers, and that's not to be ignored, but you're not as customer-centric as something as retail. So it's a different type of relationship, because lots of the time your relationships are with a lot of city governments, so you have to deal with them, and that's usually a lot of constituents and a different way of approaching it. So here's the customer lifecycle model. So especially like if you think about it, the marketing phase, this is where you're trying to attract new customers. So you send messages to your target market to attract these customer prospects. And once you if you can actually penetrate those prospective customers, hopefully they'll come and buy from you, and that's where you get your customer acquisition. And once you get that, though, you want to start tracking them and keeping them. So simple things can be done to help this, such as, think about this: how many different retail stores can you get a card or a customer loyalty card, right? Why did they do that? Well, for the very valuable reason that they can now track every one of your purchases with them. And then that gives them more information to go on to the next phase, which is manage the relationship. So once you have a customer, now what you want to try to do is keep them buying more and more from you, right? Because it's actually cheaper to maintain the relationship than it is to go out and acquire a new customer. So once you have good customers, you want them to keep coming back to you over and over and over again. So to support and resell to them. So this is the relationship management process. Now, this doesn't always last forever. You do have customers who decide that they have bought everything they want to buy from you or get frustrated with you. So then the question is, what do you do with those types of customers? You'd want to prevent them from leaving and stop. Well, there's some cases, especially like what are called low-value customers, people that may only buy once or twice from you, or maybe like they're on vacation, so they buy from you and then they're gone and they'll never see you again. Those are low-value customers too. You might want to bring them in, but the expectation that they're going to keep buying from you may be small. Now, you can do things to try to improve that and get them to be high-value customers, but it's extremely, extremely difficult. However, when you do have high-value customers, so these are the people that may come in and buy over and over and over from you, you want to keep them happy. You don't want them lost, so you're going to do everything you can to win them back. And that takes you back through this process, and you want to try to identify who these high-value customers are and keep them with you. Now, what a customer relationship management system will help you with all these processes, from the solicitation processes to the lead tracking processes to the relationship management processes. And by doing that, the whole system can help with improving your relationship with your customers. So there might be different applications all within the customer relationship management umbrella. So oftentimes, and this is basically what I'm trying to say, is it can often start with multiple different applications. So there might be one for sales, there might be one for solicitation and lead management, there might be one for relationship management, there might be one for customer support. But what you want to do is try to integrate those together, and that's what CRM applications do. So instead of having 4 or more distinct applications, now you have one application, and you might have different windows or portals to different parts of it, but the point being they all share the same database. So your organization shares this same centralized collection of data about your customers, which allows you to help your customers get what they want easier. All right, moving on. Enterprise resource planning. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to come back and visit it later in the chapter extension 9. But what an ERP system does, enterprise resource planning, is combine data from all around your entire organization. So it's not just customer not just customer applications. So if you look at the four top green things, right, those are all this in the CRM, the customer relationship management. But it does a lot more. Now, ERPs originally developed from manufacturing applications. So back in the 70s, really, they started identifying that there's multiple different manufacturing applications. Let's start combining them together. And that kind of combined with inventory management as well. So they had a lot of inventory. They want to know, both the incoming inventory and outgoing inventory, and they wanted to integrate that with their manufacturing to have one more holistic picture. Well, they started realizing this can keep expanding. So they're like, well, why don't we do this for the whole organization? So that's where the E stands for enterprise. The R, resources, basically means you're focusing on the things in the business that really help the business make money, the resources. So enterprise resource planning. And the idea here is not just to store what is currently going on, but to create plans for the future so that your business can continue to grow. So it's very goal-oriented and changing and improving the business. So that's all I'm going to talk about for today. And just keep in mind, we're going to come back and talk about that more later and develop on that idea. Now, ERP applications are great, but they're also extremely difficult to install into businesses. And there's been a lot of businesses who have tried to create an ERP application or install an ERP application and have failed, or have spent twice as long installing it as they expected, or twice as much money as they expected. So it's not always the end-all be-all best thing ever. Although if you talk to an ERP vendor, they'll pretend like it is, but there are lots of issues that develop. Another alternative is to do something called an enterprise application integration. So it might be that you, as your business is developing, you create a lot of these functional, remember we talked about the functional applications that are in multiple different departments. And so you might end up with 20 or 30 different applications, but they're already pretty good. Does that mean you have to get rid of all these applications in order to install an ERP? Well, not necessarily. Then that's where enterprise application integration comes in. It's a type of program that's designed to connect together disparate applications that might all have their separate information and their separate data and their separate processes. So basically enables communication and sharing of data, provides a single point of integration of all your information, but it's kind of layered over. In other words, it allows your functional applications to exist, but it also allows you to start sharing stuff and still get the integration that you might want. Now this can lead to a gradual move to ERP system if a business decides to go that route. So again, how does this might look if you had to model it out, right? So this is the modeling part, to thinking more abstractly about it. So you might have a CRM, you might have an MRP, which is Materials Resource Planning. That's what that stands for. Materials Resource Planning, or even Manufacturer Resource Planning. Something. There's two different variations of MRP. You might have an accounting system, and you might have a human resource system. So you already have all these systems that exist independently. So what you do is you create this interface for the integration, the EAI, Enterprise Application Integration. And this separate piece of software allows you, so like if they, a new customer makes an order, the EAI will then send that information over to the manufacturing resource planning, so that way they can start planning to manufacture the products for that customer. And then likewise, they might send information to the accounting system so they can place an order into the accounting system, and when they're paid, they can put that payment into the accounting system, and so on. All right, so there is still, I want to make this point, the EAI has no integrated or no centralized database. It might have some metadata that describes what it looks like, what the data looks like in each of these sub-functions, but there's nothing that's integrated them all together. All right, so what are the challenges when implementing new enterprise systems? And there's really four main ones. Number one, collaborative management. And as you might imagine, that means making sure people want to, are willing to collaborate together about this, because you're going to get all these different functional applications. There's people that love their current software and don't want to change. Oh, we'll get to that in a second, which is employee resistance. But you have to start with collaborative, the ability to collaborate together, so that makes sure everyone gets, every process, business process, gets what they need to do their job as well. You also need to do a really good job of defining the requirements gaps. So what is that term? It's a really fancy term. Basically, it just says, what's the difference between what we're doing now and what the new system's going to enable? And sometimes these gaps are really big, and that can create lots and lots of problems. Sometimes the gaps are small, and that's not a big problem. Now, you also have to deal with the actual transition. So oftentimes these enterprise systems, you're trying to install these things while the business is currently running. So why is that a problem? Well, what happens if there's a problem in this process? Right? So you're creating new software, but it could kill your business if suddenly you miss a lot of orders for something, right? That would be absolutely horrible. That would basically could destroy your business if it doesn't work right. Now, my boss, Dr. Hooser, his wife works at BB&T, and right now BB&T is working on changing their general ledger. So what's their general ledger? Well, this is an accounting application that basically tracks every single transaction for the bank BB&T. Every single transaction at every single bank of BB&T's banks. So they're currently changing this. Now, what would happen if they had an error in this new general ledger? Now just think about that, right? So that transition is absolutely critical that you have it exactly right. Their whole bank could be losing millions of dollars if they screw this up. And millions of dollars is a big, big freaking problem, right? All right, and then lastly is employee resistance, because oftentimes, like I said, people start using a piece of software and if they like it, they don't want to change. They're like, this is working perfectly for me. Why should I change to something new that I'm not going to like? And so what you do is you find employees who maybe not directly sabotage the new system, but certainly create havoc in that they don't want to use it, or they revert back to old ways of doing things, or they find excuses why they can't do it, or they just complain all the time. It can create a lot of problems when you switch to these new systems. And this can be true of not just enterprise level systems, but very basic systems. But at the enterprise level, what you can have is an entire, a huge employee revolt if it's not handled well. So that you have all of your employees going, this is a bunch of crap and we don't want to do it. Right? And that's not what you want. However, even with these challenges, though, the integrative capabilities of this make them a very strong pull for a lot of businesses. You just have to make sure that you address these factors to make sure they don't turn out badly for you. All right, next question. How do inter-enterprise information systems solve the problem of enterprise silos? So what this basically allows you to do, so the isolation of data does cause problems, and like we saw in our case study, that they would like, if doctors want to have reports on, their exercise data stored on a patient device or in health clubs, and patients would like to have prescription data from their providers as well as exercise data from their health club. So everybody wants to have more information, but we want to have it integrated. And I can think about this myself too, and how, when I work out, I can sometimes get some of my data captured, but not all of it. It would be great to have an integrated system that would capture all this information from different places. So, and that was kind of the idea behind the whole PRIDE system that they talked about in that case, which is they want to have, it's just a distributed system, so that it's in multiple different places, distributed across multiple computing devices. So this might be on machines like treadmills, it might be on smartphones, it might be on a laptop, or maybe you have a tablet that you write reports on. So how do you do that? Well, you got to use a lot of standard programming techniques on varied and disparate devices to flexibly communicate. And especially if you use something like cloud computing that we talked about, that allows you to have a centralized place to send all this information over the internet, so that it can connect up and be stored on an individual basis. That enables you to do things like enter enterprise systems. All right. All right. Well, I think we pretty much covered the basics of this chapter, which was, how do information systems vary by scope? Well, it starts with the personal information system, which all of you are familiar with because you all have them, whether it's your smartphone or your laptop or your desktop computers. And when you have things that start connecting together, though, especially at a small scale, when you have, let's say, and it can be as small as 5 and upwards of 100 people working together, you have something called a work group. And that work group allows, if you have a specific information system, to facilitate that work group to work together to accomplish some specific task. But you also can have information systems at the enterprise level, which can easily be thousands of people. And that's a piece of software. And we talked about a few of those, CRMs, ERPs, EAI systems. That allows the entire organization to work together effectively by sharing information across the organization in one centralized location. And then you can also go to the enterprise level, so a way of sharing information across enterprises. All right, so number 2, how do enterprise information systems solve the problems of departmental silos? Well, what they basically, we identified a few problems, including having duplicate data or data that's different or disparate processes. So we want to try to avoid those by consolidating those databases into one. We want to consolidate the business processes into a piece of software that can do all of them. And that will allow your business to be far more integrated and hopefully far more flexible to changing in the future, because it's got that core base that's the same. So what are the differences between CRM, ERP, and EAI? Well, an ERP you can think of as it can include all the CRM components. Now CRM, generally a CRM piece of application is very customer focused, doing things like marketing and sales and customer support. So it's focused just on your interactions with your customer. ERP tends to be more back-end, dealing with things like logistics and manufacturing and accounting, but can also include things like dealing with customers, and does usually contain those types of components as well. So what's an EAI? Well, an EAI is basically saying, well, we know we need to share this data, but we like our functional applications. So even though we have these departmental silos, we don't want to get rid of the good software that we already have, but we're going to integrate it together using this EAI, Enterprise Application Integration. And lastly, we talked about how do inter-enterprise IS solve the problems of enterprise silos. And essentially what it does is allows you to share information across different enterprises. And specifically something like in the health industry, this is a really big issue right now, because they're trying to develop these electronic health records that so you can share your health information with multiple different people very easily through this one system. But the system has to work across enterprises, so multiple different enterprises can all have access to this information. And by doing that, what it allows is a better focus on creating value. And that's kind of the end of the point of all this, is we want to create better value. We want to create systems that can better increase our standards of living by allowing all this information that's out there to help us be the best that we can be. And the truth of the matter is, we're just getting started on this stuff. To be honest, you see all this different information systems out there. You might think that how can we get any more? Well, the fact of the matter is there's still lots and lots and lots of room. I mean, information is almost boundless. I mean, how much data is out there that we can convert into useful information? But the problem is that there's still not a whole lot of integration. That you think about like the smartphones and the explosion of applications, the apps that have been developed for smartphones. All of them, well, I shouldn't say all of them, but probably a vast majority of them are designed to be personal information systems. They are not designed to integrate data across enterprises. And that, and I think we'll continue to see this, as new technology comes out, we're going to develop new ecosystems for software development, but it's going to start with a lot of personal systems and slowly develop into work groups and then to enterprise level and then enterprise integrations. But it takes a long time to get there. And so our current explosion of apps, and if you think about things like Facebook, right? And you're like, well, what is Facebook? Is it a personal information system or is it an enterprise information system? Well, the fact of the matter is an enterprise could use it effectively. It's hard to use it effectively because it's very limited in what it can actually do for an enterprise. Now, one thing that like ECU has used is something called Yammer, which I can't remember if I mentioned this to you guys before. But Yammer is basically Facebook designed to be internal for an internal business process. And so ECU actually has a Yammer system set up, and it's used not a lot, but as a way to basically network and communicate. Some people use it in their classes. They'll create a class group where people from the class can join Yammer and then discuss things together. So yeah, it can be an enterprise system, but oftentimes people use it in a very personalized manner. They're not looking at it to create a work group, although you can create groups. So if you can create groups, you could convert it into some sort of work group. And to some limited extent, like that's what the teacher, our parent-teacher group at my kid's school, they actually have a Facebook group, and they kind of use it somewhat for that, not as effectively as they could, but they do. And so the same thing though applies here, right? So you have these potential applications out there that sometimes they fit into these categories, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do part of the process, sometimes they do all the process. The question is, especially as we go forward, is thinking about, all right, so we have all this software out there. How best can we solve these business problems? How best can we facilitate, help our customers get what, solve their problems? So how best can we logistically get all this get our products from disparate locations into our company? And how do we deal with when we have 50 different vendors and we have to make sure, and we don't want to have to stockpile all this materials that they're sending us? So how can we work with them better so that we need less warehouse space, right? And so we'll actually spend some time talking about supply chain management systems, which are an enterprise system, right? So we're going to spend, in particular, when it gets to something as big as global issues, right? So there's a lot of good stuff we're going to be digging into next. But just keep in mind that there is a boundless amount of improvements that can still come from this, and we're only just starting to scratch the surface on what we're doing here. Well, that's all I'm going to talk about for today. And next time, though, we're going to dig into different types of functional applications and enterprise resource planning applications and how what they've done for business. Well, take care, everyone. Bye.